So, Anthony, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you.
Thank you for having me.
So, you've announced that SoFi has hit 500,000 users. How do you get to the next 500,000?
We have to continue to build on our core loan products and student loan refinancing, personal loans, mortgages. We need to continue to build out, and there are other loan products that we can add. But the real opportunity is to add a complete set of financial services products, including SoFi Money, which is a modern take on a bank account, SoFi Wealth, which is an ability to invest with SoFi, SoFi Credit Card, and SoFi Advice. And so much of 2018 will be about building those products, but still making sure our core products perform well.
You've been there 6 weeks. What is it that you want to do differently?
I think the most important thing we do as a company is build a culture that we're all proud of, a culture that's welcoming and inclusive, a culture that reflects society. We have to have a diverse employee base if we're going to serve our members, and our number one core value is that our members' interests always come first. In order to serve them well, then we have to reflect society, and so we have to have a diverse employee base that reflects the diversity of society.
Since you mentioned culture, the former CEO Mike Cagney left amid sexual harassment allegations. The CFO as well. In fact, half a dozen employees or so have stepped down from executive roles as a result of the chaos. When you walk into a company, what's your first order of business, knowing that the culture has been toxic for a really long time?
Sure. We focused on three things in my first 6 weeks. One was reforecasting 2018, making sure we're aligned on our top 5 priorities and building objectives and key results against each one of those 5 priorities. And then third, critically important to your question, is to lay out what core values do we want to have as a company. We're building on a process that took place right after the change in management called One SoFi, and I've worked with the leadership team to define 11 core values. Those core values will build the foundation of the culture we're trying to build. The next important step is educating the entire company on those core values, the behaviors that we expect from those core values, and then rewarding those that are culture carriers and punishing those that are not culture carriers. And we'll have no tolerance for employees that can't help build a great culture.
Do you have any message for women at the company specifically?
We want to have a diverse company, and that diversity is not just in sexual orientation or in income, but also in gender. We want to have a company that's 50-50 men and women at each level, not just the overall average for the company, but at each executive level, each mid-level, and each hourly level employee. And that's what society reflects. And so we'll be focused on very specific diversity and inclusion objectives. We're in the process of hiring a head of diversity and inclusion. Once we have she or he on board, we'll establish specifically where we are on the key measurements of diversity, and then set really ambitious goals and hold ourselves accountable for delivering them.
You've just hired a CFO, Michelle Gill, from Goldman, which is interesting given that people are saying Goldman is increasingly your competitor. Is this an effort to, take on the Goldman or Goldmans of the rest of the financial world?
Not at all. It's an effort about building a diverse company and hiring the best leaders. Michelle is a unique combination of a phenomenal leader, a financial expert, and a culture builder. And that really set her apart from the rest of the candidates. And we saw a great slate of candidates. So we're really pleased that we were able to hire Michelle. I didn't know her prior to this process, and really enjoyed the hours I've spent with her talking about the vision for the company, where we can go from the product set, and importantly, building a really strong culture. And so that was a rare combination. We're really lucky that we were able to convince her to join our team.
SoFi has had a few stumbles over the last year when it comes to the business. The IPO, for example, has been delayed a couple of times. Why is that? And what are the challenges? Yeah,
I think it's important to first recognize the incredible success that companies achieved. $12.9 billion of funded volume last year, up more than 60%. The company not only achieved positive EBITDA and a significant amount of EBITDA, growing the top line very significantly and reaching scale, but also free cash flow and GAAP profitability. We want to build on that success in 2018. One important area is the culture and building that foundation, but we have to invest in these other products that create more of a daily habit and more of a recurring revenue stream in order to accomplish our overall mission, which is to help people achieve financial independence.
Do you see SoFi as a public company someday, and if so, when?
It's not a priority in 2018, but absolutely I see being public in our future. We want to make sure we put in place the right building blocks. As I mentioned, we're going to make sure that we strengthen our core products, invest in new products, and then most critically, building out this membership experience. Our ability to achieve not just a rational benefit, but also an emotional benefit is bringing together a real membership experience. And so we want to nail all three of those things before we enter the public markets.
So 2 years, 3 years? What's a reasonable time frame?
I would say I'm not putting a time frame on it as much as I am conditions, which I just described.
So, let's talk about the competition out there. For example, Goldman, I mentioned, Amazon is working on a checking account-like product. You have now sort of unconventional entrants into this market where you are trying to expand.
Yeah, we think we occupy a really unique spot. We have a brand that stands for the next generation of consumer financial services, and that is a huge advantage to have. Our brand's also incredibly durable. It's really navigated through a tough environment, which shows how strong the product market fit is for our brand, and that's also important. But we're going to win because we differentiate on 3 key points. First, we're going to have the best selection. In the digital world, there's an infinite permutation of the type of selection we can have within financial services products. Second, convenience, and third is speed. We want to be the fastest at whatever it is that you want to do. We want to be the fastest at approving your loan, the fastest at letting you apply, and the fastest at getting the funds. And that applies to credit cards, that applies to a checking account, money transfers, ATMs, et cetera. And tying all 3 of those differentiators together will be this membership experience. So there's an emotional relationship where we're not just helping you with products, but education, transparency, professional networking, and career advice.
The administration, there's a lot of uncertainty surrounding it. The markets are extremely volatile. We're on the verge of a potential trade war. How does this all play out?
Listen, we're without a doubt, we're focused on what's going on in the macro environment, in the interest rate environment, and we're putting in place plans that allow us to navigate that uncertainty and have contingency plans. So we're watching interest rates. We're prepared for the interest rates to continue to rise. We've been able to offset that somewhat with tighter spreads. We're also looking at alternative ways to lower our cost of funds and finding other efficiencies in our operation.
Speaking of what's happening in Washington, Mark Zuckerberg is testifying this week in D.C. before Congress. Facebook is in the middle of a huge controversy. And speaking, of Facebook, Twitter has been dragged down, as Facebook has over the last few weeks. Where did Facebook go so wrong?
It's a very complicated situation for them in particular, and so I would have to spend more time with you to kind of go through my thoughts on it. What I can say is what we're focused on, and what we're focused on is making sure that we have the right core values and leadership at the top of the company to ensure that our members are never surprised, and to make sure their interests come first. And that involves not just transparency, but also information and education. And as long as we put their interests first and provide that transparency in addition to the information and making sure they're educated on what they're doing, we won't surprise them, and we'll avoid some of the pitfalls that we're hearing about in the news.
Do you think tech needs to be regulated?
I think an industry is regulated when the leadership within that industry can't adequately abide by some standards that they establish in running their business. And ultimately, if the leadership can step up in all of these different companies to provide the right business environment, the right consumer environment, then they'll do it themselves. And there's no need for an outside force.
Well, the financial industry has been regulated for a long time, and some would say it's pretty clear that tech can't regulate itself. So does that mean tech needs regulation?
I think tech's a pretty broad term that involves everything from software to hardware to consumer technology and media. And within the media landscape, there is a fair amount of regulation. And so the FTC, some of the other important regulatory bodies do provide regulation that they all have to comply with, including personal private information. So there are some new areas that require a greater scrutiny, and the leaders within the industry should focus on solving those areas where there isn't transparency and there needs to be.
Do you think tech is in for a reckoning of sorts? Do you think that the way that business has been done can't continue?
I think it 100% comes down to the leadership and their actions now. The problems have been identified, the concerns have been identified. Do they put in place the right mechanisms to right what is right now being viewed as very controversial and needs to be solved? Right.
But if Twitter or Facebook played a role in influencing the election, isn't that a problem?
I think that's a question you have to talk to them about. I'm at SoFi.
Okay, last question, which is not about SoFi, but it is about your prior experience. Do you think Twitter can reaccelerate growth? You were the key architect of the growth strategy, and things have been looking good, but can it really break out of that 300 million some users?
I think they have the right strategy and the right focus. The company re-engineered to focus on the case of showing what's happening, keeping people informed. I think that's the right strategy. I was part of the team to help build that strategy, and I think as long as they stay focused on that, there will be ebbs and flows, but ultimately that's a very unique value proposition that only Twitter can uniquely deliver on. And I think that's the key to how the growth of the company unfolds. But in terms of the specifics, I haven't been there, obviously, in a while. When I was there, we were able to drive an acceleration of growth in the audience. And what unfolds now is something I'll be watching just like the rest of the outsiders, since I'm not there any longer.
All right, Anthony Noto, CEO, of SoFi. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Emily.
Thank you.